So somebody told me, I like to start with something funny at the beginning of church, and this is an old joke, but I think Trudy told me this again recently. There's a pastor who just got tired of coming to church. Sick and tired of preaching every Sunday. I got out of preaching last week. I like that very much. And so he called in and he said, I'm just not feeling well. I'm pretty sick. You're going to have to get somebody to take my place. And they said, fine, and they're going to do a hymn sing. And he grabbed his golf clubs and he headed out of town where nobody knew him. And he went to the golf course. And he teed up on the first hole, pulled back his swing, a perfect drive, 200, 300, 350 yards. And then suddenly a gust of wind swept through, picked up the ball in the air, made it land 420 yards right on the green, and it rolled, curved down the hill, and went right in the hole. He was like, yes, God, yes. And this angel was with God and said, God, why did you do that for him? And God said, well, who is he going to tell? My goal today is to encourage us to give our lives to Christ. Easter Sunday sermons are always to encourage people to give your heart to Jesus and to become more involved in a local church family where you can grow. One thing that keeps us from being active in church, like this pastor, or even just committing some time each day to spending time with God, just maybe 2 minutes before you get out of bed, or maybe 2 hours in your most comfortable chair, listening to God music, or reading the Bible, or listening to a sermon, or just talking to God, or just relaxing with God. But what keeps us from doing these moments every day and every week is that we don't think we can actually live up to it. We don't think that we are perfect enough for church or for God. Lots of times we see other Christians who go to church almost every week. And we think, well, they do bad stuff. I mean, how many of you know me personally? I think everybody in this room, right? You're like, well, if he goes to church, surely I could go to church. But that's not the way we think. We sometimes look at people and say, well, they must be hypocrites. But in our hearts, we realize that we're simply judging them by a ruler that we know that we can't live up to ourselves. And we're right. We cannot live up to our commitments to God. We can't be as perfect as God. But we try. It doesn't make us hypocrites any more than trying to putt on the green and missing makes us a hypocrite. We know what the goal is. We know where the hole is. We know what the objective is. And we keep missing. So what? We keep putting. Jesus faced every temptation. I thought about taking some kids to a putting green recently and at Schwader's. And it was closed after hours. But one of the kids with me got a big fish net, and we fished out balls from the pond, and we found some putters lying around, and we played anyway. So I'm not sure I'm the best example of this, but the point is we play the game. We keep going to church, even if we have to break a few rules. Jesus faced every temptation we do, and somehow he never sinned. Never. Now, he got mad, but he didn't sin. He flipped over tables in church. He made a whip and beat people, but somehow he didn't sin. He cursed a fig tree and called people snakes and hypocrites, but he didn't sin. Sometimes I think our idea of what it means to be good enough or perfect or hypocrites ain't quite right, because Jesus don't quite fit the mold of this peaceful little benign person wearing a beautiful robe with perfectly coiffed hair. Jesus isn't like what we think we're supposed to be like, but somehow, he really was a real person. He told people the truth, even when it hurt. He forgave people that hurt him. He went to find his friends after they abandoned him and left him. I can't tell you how many times on Facebook this year I've heard people say, well, if people leave you, just let them go. That's not Jesus' motto. They smacked him around, then they let him go, and he chased after him and said, I want to be your friend still, no matter what. He then gave his very life for the crimes and the sins that you and I committed. People that hadn't even been born yet. All because he loved us so much that he stretched out his arms and I said, I love you this much. And he let himself be nailed to the cross. This is no fake, churchy, holier than thou piety. It's just a real God who became a real person because he really loves you. So yeah, we cannot keep our commitments to God. Not even if we say, I'm going to pray 2 minutes every day. But God knows it. So God keeps his commitments to us. Trusting your life to Jesus simply means that you accept that God accepts you. Trusting Jesus does not mean you're good. It doesn't mean that it means you see there's a hole in your life and you believe Jesus is the bridge over it. And there's one big hole every one of us is going to walk over. It's that, and the Bible calls it the valley of the shadow of death. Every one of us is going to die. It's not a surprise. We're not going to get to the end of our life and say, oh, I didn't know that I'd die. We all know that. And believing Jesus just says, I simply trust that He is the bridge that's going to let me walk across that hole. Those women who first came to Jesus in the tomb, the angel didn't appear to them because they were brave and strong. The soldiers were brave and strong, but the soldiers were shaking and fainted like dead men. I wish it had said fainted like little girls. Ah! The people that we think are supposed to be perfect aren't the ones that are perfect. Jesus didn't appear to these women because they had accomplished the one single simple task the angel told them to do. Go tell the disciples. He caught them on the way before they had ever done anything good. Jesus didn't appear to the women because they worshiped Him properly. Not because they had the proper clothes on. They didn't worship Jesus until He came to them. Jesus came to them because He wasn't looking for worshipers, but witnesses. He wasn't looking for messiahs, but messengers. He wasn't looking for people who were perfect. He was looking for people who would proclaim what He had done, that He was alive. And these first apostles, in the Bible, men are supposed to be the rulers of everything, right? We're the first apostles Jesus sent to tell of His resurrection was what? Women. Women who would not have been able to testify to anything in a court of Roman law. It's because God doesn't need who you are. He loves who you are. God doesn't need our worship. He doesn't need our holiness. He doesn't need our rightness. He doesn't need our goodness. God has all of that in spades. All He wants from you is for you to accept that He loves you. And then see how that little seed of faith grows in your life and changes you. And then just be a witness. Not doing anything, just being who God made you to be. God is looking for someone who would just tell people what's going on with them. After Jesus rose from the dead, He did not go instantly to heaven. He did not disappear. How long did He stay on earth talking to people? 40 days. He met hundreds and hundreds of people over and over again, talking and walking, eating and drinking, blessing and breathing on them, encouraging them, explaining, showing them His scars, and moving right through walls. Saying over and over, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Why did He do it so many times? Why did He do it for 40 days so long? Because He knew we wouldn't believe it the first time. But He did this because He wanted their witnesses to be so strong that they would be able to pass this Easter news down to you and to me 2,000 years later. It's the only thing He cared about. That you and I, right here and now, are as much a part of Jesus' family and His group of friends as His original disciples were. I want to read some quotes that Andrea read to you from Peter's sermon. Peter, after he had seen all of this, seen Jesus in person, seen Jesus resurrected, had the Holy Spirit come on him and spoke in different language. Then Peter stood up and spoke to thousands of people, and 3,000 people became Christians and baptized in one single day. So you pretty much think Peter has it figured out. But what was the first words that Peter said that Andrea read us? I now, at that moment, years later, I now realize it's true that God shows no favoritism. We are thick. We don't get it the first time. And finally, Peter, after all those accomplishments, he's looking at this crowd and he says, wow, I finally get it. God actually loves all of us. And then Peter begins to explain what his purpose. He says, well, I was with Jesus and I walked on water. He simply said, we're witnesses. We saw what He did. And He told us to witness and share it to you. He commanded us to testify that Jesus is the one who is the judge of the living and the dead. That was Peter's entire message. Peter also said something interesting. He said, every prophet who's come before me testifies of Jesus. Do you see like a theme running through here? God doesn't need workers. He needs witnesses. He just wants you to experience the joy of what He's doing with you one-on-one and then be willing to share it with other people. Jesus is sending us out as witnesses, not as bill collectors, but desperately trying to find heirs who have an inheritance that they're sitting on. How many of you have like a rich uncle and a lot of money? Mom, did you raise your hand? Oh man, I was excited. We are like heirs who are like living, low income, whatever we need to get by. But we have a brother who's a multi-millionaire. And he's sending these people out all over the world just to tell them, hey, did you know your brother died, rose back to life, and he's got this entire inheritance just for you. It's got your name on it. And we're like, no, I've got my own bank account, my own house. It's like, you don't understand. You're a millionaire. You're rich. You're rich beyond your wildest dreams. You are righteous beyond your one single best moment. And you will live beyond your last final dying breath. Everybody's birth certificate comes with an unwritten expiration date. We all die. Life ends. That's the definition of life. So you think that God would invest this powerful message in something like a Mount Rushmore. I personally think that God should have sent his disciples to the mountain and chiseled this big face that said, he didn't do that. You would think he would put the message in a tree. You carve a tree and you see the message for centuries after. He didn't do that. He didn't put the message in something that will live long enough to tell the tale. God has a very poor understanding of marketing. Instead, God intentionally picked witnesses that he knew could not live to the court date. Why? Because he's not counting on our ability to testify. He's only asking that we be honest witnesses about what he's doing in our life. A witness is not on trial themselves. A testimony is not about you. It is about others. Hey, buddy. One time, no, he's fine, Wes. He's fine. One time, I invited a little kid to church, and he hadn't been to church ever. And I met this kid at a party. The kid would not speak to me for 3 hours. Would just go in these big circles around me, sort of like a vulture, sort of watching and kind of speaking. But once the kid came to church, the entire service, the kid made a beeline, come up to me, grab a hold of me, tell me something, go back. I loved it. I stopped being worried about kids fidgeting, not when I had kids, but I was preaching at a village in Africa one time, and everybody was sitting on the hill, and we were talking, and suddenly a mom whipped out the the natural feeding mechanism. And I'm like 21 years old. I'm like, okay, I can either preach or what? And at that point, I just decided, whatever happens in church, happens in church. We're just going to go ahead. The testimony is not about you. The testimony is for others. It's what we learn in Jesus' resurrection. It's that God can turn every death into a destiny, every test into a testimony, every trial into a triumph, and every mess into a message. You are God's chosen vessels to send this message to the whole world. Now, he's not asking you to be an expert witness. He's not asking you to know everything about religion or everything about anything. He's asking you to simply tell him what you have seen him do in your life. People think faith is about seeing what's not real, but it's really about believing what we actually see. Sometimes we see stuff, God's worked in our life, he's brought us peace and healing in the midst of conflict or crisis, and then we want to rationalize it. We want to rationalize. We want to pretend like we did it on our own. But he's just asking you to be honest with what God's done in your heart, that little bitty seed that you planted. When the children, one of the girls asked me to give a sermon today for the children's time on, do I have a purpose in the world? Now, when an 8-year-old kid asks you that, you listen. And I said, why do you want that? And she said, well, I have a friend at school who died when she was a baby. And they resuscitated her and she came back to life. But now my friend doesn't think she has a purpose. And I told her that God never would have made her and never would have brought her back to life if she didn't have a purpose. So please tell a story about how we have a purpose and God can turn things away. I'll just skip that page since I already read it once. The second point for witnessing is that you have to wear good clothes when you go to court. Whenever I go to court to testify or to be in a hearing, I always dress up a little bit, right? When Jesus rose from the dead, what did he leave behind? He left all those grave clothes. Now, he didn't appear naked for 40 days. There's no account of that in the Bible. I assume he had some clothes on. He put new clothes on. Yes, he still had the nail scars. Yes, he was the same person. Yes, he still liked to eat and drink and talk with his friends, but he wore different clothes. And that's what he's asking us to do. Our witness, our testimony in the world will be better received if we talk a certain way, if we act a certain way. And this list that Andrea read us is not very surprising. We all know you don't need me to tell you right from wrong. You don't need me of all people to tell you right from wrong. But I'm going to read these words. Compassion. Feel what others are feeling. Put on kindness. Treat others with a little thoughtfulness. Humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. It's considering other people just as good as you are, even better at some things. Gentleness. Talk to people with a little calm manner. Patience. Cut people some slack. Wait and see what's going to work out without rushing a judgment. And then I love this one. Bearing each other's burdens. I'm going to put this in David language because I don't know how to say it. It means put up with crap. Bear each other's burdens. It means put up with the stuff that goes on around us. And then he says this last one twice. Forgive whatever grievances you may have against each other. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. This is not just words. This is not just letting something go. Jesus forgave the men who beat him and nailed him to the cross, and his final words to them were not, wait till I get you in hell. His final words were, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. Now, this whole thing is not religious people are good and people who don't go to church are bad. It is about all of us. Remember in the story today, there were two religious leaders, right? Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, who was on the council. When Jesus died, they brought the grave clothes and they brought 75 pounds of perfume. I don't think all the ladies in this building together have 75 pounds of perfume. Sometimes it is church people who try the hardest to cover up that there is death in our lives. Joe and Nick did not really believe that Jesus was coming back to life. Peter did not believe that Jesus was coming back to life. Mary and Simone did not believe that Jesus was coming back to life. The scripture today said they came to see the tomb. Everybody believed that dead means dead. And so they brought 75 pounds of perfume to cover up the smell. It is often the least religious people among us who know how to show that compassion and show that love. It's no mistake that here at church, when I needed the front yard weed eated this morning, I got here and realized it was knee high in the front. It's like it's Easter. Who showed up? But JR, who almost never goes to church. But he made this yard look beautiful for me and for you. It's no mistake that when a few people in our church said they were having trouble hearing me because we're getting a few more people, it's getting crowded, and also our hearing is getting worse, the guy, Andrew, who often works on Sunday and can't come to church often, hooked up this entire microphone that I managed to mess up in 1 hour. God is calling us to realize that He loves us and heals us and forgives us. And He's calling us to share that love like Andrew and JR did. Now, no one puts on new clothes right on top of the old, right? I have tried that before. I'm lazy. I don't like to shower. I don't like to change clothes. But it starts to stink. It's a little crunchy. It's a little uncomfortable. You have got to strip down. And being stripped down can be embarrassing. It can also be uncomfortable and cold and breezy. But we have to strip off, have to go through that process. What we call in religious terms is that liminal moment. That threshold, that leaving the harbor moment, where we take the stuff that we grabbed on now to cover us, to satisfy, hoping that this next thing is really going to make me happy. If I can be angry at that person, if I can have this desire of my heart, it's really going to satisfy me. But it never does. Every addiction requires more of it. It's not a cure. We hope it'll give us peace. We hope it'll let us sleep through the night. We hope it'll take away our worries and help us not feel afraid like the women. But none of it ever lasts. I watch a lot of Dr. House now. And he's always popping Valiums, right? But they only last so long and the effect wears off. Today we hear clearly what Andrea said, now you must rid yourselves. Strip off everything such as anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy words from your lips, and lie no more to yourself or others. We are all in the same boat. I'm going to pick one of those sins out because you all know me so well. Even the most religious people in the world have dirty clothes on. Today we heard that Jesus was betrayed, beaten, convicted, stripped naked, nailed to a tree, stabbed with a spear just to make sure he was dead. And he still managed to love. So my personal example is me. It is very fun being a pastor. It is a great job. My son called me several months ago and he said, "Are you still a pastor?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "That must be a fun job." It is. But one of the things I don't like is that everybody feels free to point out my sins to me. Thank you very much. Now, I like to cuss. I say inappropriate words. I always have. I probably always will. I watch movies where people cuss. I know I'm the only person in here who does that. I have friends who like to cuss, like sailors and factory workers and politicians. I enjoy colorful Southern expressions. It gives me a sense of flair, of self-expression. It helps me cope with stressful situations. But the Bible clearly tells me, as several of my brothers and sisters in this room have clearly told me, I must rid myself of filthy words from my lip. I asked a couple of guys in this room who told me that. I said, "Well, do you not cuss at work?" They said, "Yeah, but not at church." Well, I'm damned if I do, damned if I'm at church. I don't know. I'm stuck. But God clearly says, that's not the words I need you to speak. I need you to speak words of kindness and gentleness and compassion and love. And you can't take something off and run around naked unless you're a 3-year-old kid. That's adorable. But when you're 30 or 40, it's not cute anymore. You got to take off those bad habits and you have to replace it with something else. So instead of saying something kind of smart alecky, my goal is to say something supportive and encouraging. And that's a process. Once we are born, we start dying. That is what Andrea meant when she read, "You have died." When you accept this and you realize that you're already dead. You know I love Band of Brothers, right? And the crazy captain has got a kid who's paralyzed with fear in the trenches. I don't know if you remember that. And he says, "You got to fight." He says, "I can't move." He says, "Your problem is you think you're still alive." And once you accept the fact that you're already dead, then you're going to be free to live and fight as a soldier. And he was. And he died. It's an unfortunate irony, but you are like a seed. You are dead and you're planted in the ground. Your life is already over at some point. You have that expiration date. But that's not the end of your story. When they bury you literally, even though we already have a time at the end, you are going to grow into something that does not look like a little brown nut. You are going to grow into a fabulous flower or a tree or a fruit, something amazing, more than you ever could. We know how the story ends. We simply have to dress for the job. But I want to be very clear about this. You are not dressing good and talking well so that God will love you. You can never be good enough, and God will never stop loving you. Is Aaron and Lori are here. They have 4 boys who are Eagle Scouts. 4! That's an amazing accomplishment for anyone, especially if you're a military family like them and you've had to move so they don't have like the solid roots. I know so-and-so forever. But Aaron and Lori did not start loving their boys when they got their Eagle Scout. Is it badge? Is it called a badge? Or rank? And they would not have stopped loving the boys if they failed to get their Eagle Scouts. Look, or as my granddad Perry used to say, now listen, every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. God is telling us again and again and again and again and again, as often as you tell your own children that you love them, that He loves you, He forgives you, He is healing you, He is helping you, He is with you, and He has a purpose for your life. So put on that love. It's not going to make you be lovable, but let it be your defining quality. Let it be your gang colors. Let it be your uniform. Let it be your signature style you're known for. Put on the love of Jesus that He put on us when He died on the cross, and take off everything else. If you find something that doesn't fit Jesus' love, take it off and put on more love. I'm going to close by offering each of us a chance. You are needed and wanted at this congregation, this church family. If you come once a year, once a month, once a week, or you come with me like so many of you have come up here during the week and helped out with stuff, we need you to be part of this church family. But you need to know that Jesus died and rose again for you. So we're about to do the offering. You've already done an offering. You're here. You brought yourself. That's a huge offering to God. And He's going to reward that. But I'm going to close with a silent prayer. I'm going to talk. You can be silent. If you would like to offer Jesus your life, if you would like to trust Him and accept that He accepts you, then please pray with me. Would you all bow your heads, please? Can I pray with y'all down there? That's a good idea.